Welcome to Strength Chat Podcast, presented by Kabuki Strength. Introducing your hosts, Chris Duffin, the mad scientist of strength, Rudy Cadlow, mature athlete and coach, and the wizard of training himself, Brandon Sen.
Welcome to Strength Chat with your host, the mad scientist of strength, myself. To my right, my partner in crime, Dr. Rudolph, and to my left, my friend, sometimes, and always my coach, the wizard of training, Brandon Sen. So, yeah.
He's not your friend sometimes.
I know.
I understand you got a new program. He's not so friendly now.
Well, he was not my friend a couple weekends ago when we were hosting a seminar, and I rely heavily on Brandon every time I need a break, to catch my thoughts or, sit down and have some coffee or some caffeine. I don't drink coffee. I just go, Brandon, can you step in? And he's on point, right? He just jumps in and covers for me and just makes it so much cleaner and easier. And
actually, the way the last couple of seminars been going, it's kind of the other way around. He has you relieve him. When
I know that's the way
he carries the heavy load.
That's where we try to shift to. Brandon's leading the seminars, and I sit and I nod approvingly. But you weren't there.
Yeah.
He was there. He was there in spirit. So what happened was after the Friday seminar, we decided to do.
Well, let's take a step back even further for our listeners to paint the whole picture. We had the wonderful.
Well, this is supposed to be a funny story. Now, don't get too serious.
I'll preface this with the audience by saying it's ironically funny. So, It's still not funny to me, but it is funny to onlookers, I suppose. So we had the wonderful people from the Owens.
Owens Recovery Science.
Yeah, blood flow restriction.
Come out and give us a demo on their Delphi unit blood flow restriction training. And if you guys have probably experimented with blood flow restriction in the past, listened to our podcast or other resources, it's completely different when you have a machine regulate it for you. So we had the Delphi hooked up, and it just torched us.
I might have told them to work specifically on you and put you through the ringer.
Oh my God!
Possibly.
It was hamstring and adductor destruction. I did hamstring curls and another superset for a lot of reps and couldn't stand straight. Anyway, that produced more fatigue in my lower body than I think I have ever experienced in my entire life. So let's keep that in mind as we move through this story.
Always good to lay out excuses early. Yep, I got it.
Okay, well, I'll back you up. That was Wednesday night.
We're seeking truth.
And then we flew all day Thursday.
Thursday, which was fine. We have our Friday seminar. Great, went super well. 3 hours intro, did it. Wasn't that engaging, so we're like, yeah, let's. We're feeling up to train, so we'll train. So I think it was deadlift day for me. It was deadlift day for Brady and Darrington. And I end up tweaking my back on a rep, and it ended up being one of the worst back injuries that I have ever sustained. And it's ironic because we're about to teach movement, breathing, and bracing at this seminar where I just destroyed myself because I wasn't bracing well enough. I didn't even make it to the second 2 days of the seminar. I couldn't even move. The best part is I'm crumpled up to the left. I can't even stand straight. I'm getting horrible spasms. I'm worried about going to the bathroom with that amount of pressure. And we go out to dinner that night, and Chris hasn't seen me yet. He was doing his own thing. I go, hey, look at this video. I hurt my back. And he goes, fix it.
Fix it tonight. Go to your room and fix it tonight.
We got 2 more days of seminar.
I was like, all right, man. I got on the ground to do some movement work. I couldn't get up for 3 hours because the spasms were so bad. Needless to say, I didn't make it to the second 2 days of the seminar, and it was painfully ironic that we were teaching people how to move properly.
So how did you enjoy Chicago from inside your hotel room?
Awful. It wasn't even relaxing. I was just laying there in agony.
We had to bring you food and masseuses.
I still think it was my bracing was okay that day. It wasn't perfect, but it was a combination of the fatigue, traveling, maybe mental weakness. I don't know.
You're blaming it on Mario Novo.
Yeah, Yeah.
I don't care.
Our
No
guest
sympathy.
today is just rolling his eyes as a chiropractor saying,
Well,
"Oh, you
it's
dummy.
also funny.
Oh, you dummy."
This was.
We've all been there. We've all been there.
I actually wanted to tell this story like 2 weeks ago, but Chris like, no, you can't. Don't tell people that. You can't tell them that you got hurt.
Go to your room and fix it, man. Fix it.
We're-
We gotta speak. We gotta speak tomorrow.
I was like,
get your shit together.
We're teaching a seminar how to lift heavy stuff and not get hurt when he gets hurt.
It wasn't even any explanation. He just goes, fix it tonight. I was like, all right. Like, I'll do my best, but I'm telling you, man, I'm having to like lean on Rudy and Brady to get back to the room. Like,
That wasn't okay. Funny story.
Okay.
Let's move on.
Yeah, let's move on. So today, I'm really happy to have Dr. Craig Liebenson on. My computer screen went blank, which has all of my my intro stuff. So whatever, I'll just go off of memory. So Craig owns L.A. Sport and Spine down in L.A. and I've been there myself and work with some of his staff who are absolutely amazing. Craig also travels and does a lot of instructing. He has some books and DVDs. The Functional Training Handbook, which I think came out in 2014, is a really good piece. Craig I would call Craig a good friend. We've spoken together a few times, and he's almost a mentor to me, I think. So Craig is the one that introduced me early on, had my first experience learning DNS philosophies in his Prague School to Athletic Development series. So anyone that wants to get, I know I have a lot of our listeners that we've kind of filtered towards going to DNS courses. Check out Craig's work as well. Craig, I believe, is the one that actually really was instrumental in getting DNS into the United States. But beyond that, Craig has just a tremendous way of looking at a lot of different philosophies and finding the best pieces out of all those and implementing those as needed. So that's my intro there, Craig. So hopefully it's adequate. Is there any key pieces that I may have missed there that you want to throw out?
No,
Okay.
no, that's phenomenal. I feel honored to be here with all three of you guys. And Brandon, you're back. Is it feeling better?
no, it's not.
Well, he can walk now.
I saw you lifting weights.
I squatted 2 plates, and it was horrible. I'm not yet. It's not great. Benching with my feet up and doing that whole thing.
Well,
I got to make a trip down to see you guys.
Go see Dr. Snell.
Oh, believe me, I know it.
Yep. So, Craig, we've had a few discussions of late, and I brought up DNS in the intro, but there's a couple different things that I see, and I think you have seen kind of going on in the industry, and I wanted to spend some time chatting about a few of those, and they're almost like two distinctly different ends of the spectrum. You've got some individuals that are just saying, "Hey, just go move. Don't worry about anything. We're building up too much, fear of pain, and taking out some really fundamental, important pieces about like moving well under load." And then we get, certain groups that become very, very dogmatic about like their approach and spend so much time like overcorrecting and overcoaching. And our philosophy, at least, is we try to simplify things, as much as possible to get the desired results. But I see both ends of that kind of going on in the industry right now. And what are some of your thoughts on that?
That's apropos. I think it's timely to talk about that, because my own personal journey, I feel like I fell into the trap years ago of feeling that I needed to make sure that people had almost perfect technique all the time. And in the rehab field, maybe it's one end of the spectrum because people are on thin ice because of pain or injury. And maybe it's similar to in powerlifting at the other end of the spectrum in elite athletics, where, of course, you want to have phenomenal technique there also. But I think something went wrong. I think that what we did is we created something John Rusin calls Rehab Purgatory.
Yep.
Is that where that's from? I always quote. I credit you with that. I
Yeah,
love that. I love that term. So
No, and I think that we lost our way. I think we were right, but I think we were wrong. I think that we lost the sweet spot, and we lost the value of load because we were policing perfection to the nth degree, to infinity and beyond, and then people became overly concerned about their form and their pain, and these are people that weren't having to lift heavy things, and I think that we were holding them back.
Well, I think there's a certain point to like always practicing being better, but we get this where people that's all that they do, and they never actually like work towards progressing, and or even with the the correctives and stuff like that. Brandon over here uses the term quite a bit when we're doing our seminars. We don't want to win the exercise, like. The goal of doing that stuff is to get better and, or take whatever proprioceptive, piece that we want and actually move to like loaded movement, right? And that we can progress and move forward. And I think that's what we're missing is like, just because you're practicing to be better doesn't mean that you drop everything else because you're never going to have like perfection. There's so many nuance and detail to everything.
And what is perfection? What is perfection? What's a perfect squat? You have so many body types and musculoskeletal, variations out there. I mean, how can you ever look at one person and say you're not perfect?
Isn't the pursuit of perfection really the opposite almost of progress? Like shouldn't we look for catalysts? Shouldn't we look for impactful interventions that will catalyze adaptation as opposed to trying to make something absolutely perfect?
Yes, absolutely.
I think I get some of that from Marty Gallagher, where he talks about getting the mostest from the leastest, and
absolutely,
and it's you're looking for that minimal intervention. Charlie Weingroff talks about lowest system load, or we hear Gray Cook talk about the minimal effective dose to create what? To create progress, change.
Absolutely. So, the question is, how do we, because it's really easy to see this happening like all over the place, and how do we affect, change in the industry or bring awareness to these concepts?
I think by doing what we're doing here and by what I'm doing at the rehab end and what you're doing at the lifting end, reminding people that it's about progress and how do you achieve progress and how do you catalyze it. The other problem is if we overcoach, we take away people's opportunity to learn for themselves, which if you're a beginner, it's almost like you're shaming them because they're always making mistakes. Tuck your chin, don't shrug your shoulders, brace more, arch your back more, don't arch your back too much. We're not allowing them the opportunity to fail. And then you get into the pain science side. If it's rehab, they begin to become overly fearful and worried about doing things wrong. And we make them more fragile instead of making them more resilient.
Absolutely. I'd never even really thought about the impact that has potentially on like you said, the shaming effect of a new lifter, where you're just everything. If you're coaching people constantly about anything and everything that's wrong, all they're taking is like, negative inputs, or could be potentially.
Yeah, affects their psyche for sure.
Yeah, so if you have to lift heavy, you've got fear, and if you're in pain, you have fear, and we know in both cases, it's a limiter. You have to perform at a high level. You can't have any fear, and the patients who are being sensitized by their MRI or by the labels that we're giving people, these people start moving in a protective way, and they become inappropriately stiff.
Well, let's dive down that path for a minute. I'm really interested in that discussion on the clinical side with the oversensitization after people having MRIs, X-rays, particularly the MRIs, in dealing with like we said, back pain or potential back issues or things of that nature, where all of a sudden you could see that. How do you manage that in practice, knowing the effects that some of that can have, that people think it's a some sort of life sentence, or I'm one of those people with back pain. How do you manage that in your practice, since you own a place called L.A. Sport and Spine, so I know that you deal with a lot of spine issues. So
I think every single day it's unique. I've got to develop trust, first of all. So it starts by listening to people, hearing what their fears and worries and concerns are, and then hearing them describe what their interpretation of the problem is. So if their interpretation winds up resting on a diagnosis of degenerative arthritis or a herniated disc or a torn labrum, that gives me clues. When I find out how much they've restricted their activities and how dangerous they perceive normal activities, that gives me clues. When I hear about how long they've had the problem, what treatments they've had, what they're expecting from me, if they're expecting palliative care, all those things help me to create a frame. And then I want to alter their perception. So we know that if you perceive something is threatening, or traumatic, or a fait accompli, that right off the bat, it's going to be a much bigger mountain to climb. So if I can alter their perception, if I can tell them that, I can ask them, did you know that 70% of people have arthritis on their MRI and don't even have pain? They'll go, no. And they thought that arthritis equals pain. It's a one-to-one relationship. Mm-hmm. If I can explain to them that a lot of people have false positives and have no pain, and other people have tons of pain and it's coming from other factors, like tight hamstrings or weak core, or what have you, that begins to get them thinking differently. And my end goal is to get them to consider the possibility that it's multifactorial, and that there are going to be intervention points. For instance, if we're stuck on the X-ray and the MRI, then we have to take a structural approach. But if I can get them off of the hardware and onto software, we can reboot the computer. We can work on the muscle, soft tissues, their motor control, and we can influence their ability to adapt to different musculoskeletal stresses and strains. Once I get them open to that possibility, then I just have to get results. So now it becomes a hypothesis, and we test it, and I don't promise them a cure. I want them to insist that I demonstrate what I'm talking about. And so then we start, and I've got to get results.
I think that's great, a great approach, dealing with the mind first. But they have to come see you first, and they have to get diagnosed. And there's so many people out there. How many times you hear someone, I've hurt my back or I've hurt my knee, and so I'll never lift again, or I'll never do this again. I'll never play golf again. I'll never do it. Whatever their play was before, they just give up. And it's sort of frustrating. How do we reach those people and convince them that, yeah, you can recover from this, you can move on? There is a life after an injured back or an injured knee.
Well, that's what we're all doing. I hope that we're going to get close to a tipping point in the not too distant future. Catherine Raymond, she's got a new book on the crooked spine, or the crooked spine industry. And she's getting a lot of traction.
Catherine Raymond.
And I'll even get flack from chiropractic associations where they'll say, I heard you were quoted as saying that, people need to manage their symptoms on their own and learn self-care, and that adjustments or manipulative therapy have a limited role. And my feeling is, listen, anything can be a catalyst, but I need to show people what they can do for themselves. If they're dependent on me, then I have not achieved the goal. No, I want people to feel that they are not fragile. And the only way to turn somebody from being under Damocles' sword to being like Phoenix is to let them gain some self-efficacy, some confidence.
Absolutely. I mean, that's, you are not responsible for their back. Like everybody they have to get into that mindset where they can own it and have an impact on it. Is like, that's priority one. And, believing that it can be fixed. Like, I'm sure I've seen that you've worked with a lot of pro speed, athletes or teams in the past. I'm sure you see pretty distinct difference between, an athlete viewpoint and a, general population. In jest, we told the story about Brandon, and my response was, well, fix it. Like, cause that's what I expect. Like, that's what I would do. Like that's what
Wasn't
we
in
do.
That tone.
Let's move forward right now. But
that's what the coach should tell me. We need him tomorrow. We don't want this to be 5 days on the DL.
That's right.
That's actually a really interesting point. Having really recent experience with this, we have a pretty good understanding of, like, when we get injured, we work through things, and we know it's not a death sentence within, like, our community or maybe our bubble here, specifically in our gym, and maybe people that we're in frequent contact with. With that said, I find it pretty infrequent that I go out to seek professional help with any injuries that I have, mostly because they haven't been bad enough. But I did go out to seek a professional, our actual in-house chiropractor for my most recent one, and then we're going through stuff, and she's telling me, like, these things that are going on. I'm like, oh my God, is this, like, way worse than I thought it was? And then it's like, okay, take a step back, and, like, this stuff can get worked through, So that was actually, I never really had a full appreciation for that. Like, when people said, I can never squat again or whatever. It was I had, like, a very brief moment of that, and then I was like, okay, well, that's probably not true. So, not the diagnosis at all. Like, she's fantastic, but, like, my actual how I was perceiving that information coming from her was very alarming at first. And then I was like, wait.
And that's even coming from a chiro that is trains at our facilities, familiars with our methods, like. Yeah, and you kind of sets you that direction, right up front. So, yeah.
We have to be careful how we say things and know who we're saying them to. Like a type A who goes boom and bust is a completely different patient than somebody who's very anxious and is very nervous and avoids. The person who avoids, I have to be a cheerleader. The person who's type A who goes boom and bust, I've got to scare the crap out of them so they begin to pace themselves and make sure that their stress is recoverable stress, and then they get recovery. I'll see people where they want to get their good workout in all at once because they've been on the road for 2 weeks, and then they'll overdo.
Yeah, I want to get strong by tomorrow.
By yesterday.
Hey, Brandon, I think you said something that was interesting. Maybe we can talk about this for a sec, Chris. Yeah. Is that okay?
Yeah.
You mentioned that you kind of knew why your back went out.
Yep. I have ideas. Like, I think anytime something happens, we try and apply some type of reason to it so we can understand. But I feel like I have an idea of why.
What was it that you said before? What do you think?
Well, so previously it was abnormally high fatigue levels in the areas that I was trying to work that day, coupled with travel, stress, and very prolonged periods of sitting on our flying, I think kind of combined to create this ultimate little shitstorm of faulty patterns.
That's what I thought you said. So you were in a state of fatigue, and you'd been sitting a lot.
Yeah.
So the fatigue was from lack of sleep, or from overtraining. What was it from?
It was from a new training stimulus that it was a new training stimulus that was taken to complete muscular failure in the blood flow restriction training.
That's where we got that from.
And then jumped on a day-long flight the very next day, and then
deadlifted,
and then seminar, and deadlifting. So probably not the any one thing, more of the sequence of things. Yeah.
Was the deadlifting a personal choice, or because you had to because you were demonstrating?
Personal choice.
Would you do it again?
Yeah, I probably would, just because I had no inclination going into it that something was wrong. I'm in hindsight though.
No, would you do it the same way if you had all those things leading up to it, knowing that you went through a new training stimulus out on the plane? Would you still do that?
I think the correct.
What did you learn? Hold on. What did you learn from it?
Because if the answer is yes, then Brandon, we got.
He learns that he gets no sympathy from his boss.
No, this is actually a really hard question because I think I know what the right answer is, but I also think like it's really hard to turn off that like. Especially for all of us working with people, we have like a coach's brain and then we have like the athlete brain, right? And the athlete brain is like, okay, no matter what, go ahead. And then the coach's brain like, well, maybe let's do this. So it's really challenging for me to say that I would do it differently. I think I would become more aware because of that situation, and that might influence for future choices. I think the right answer is no, though. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's the right answer.
So you would become more aware that the new training stimulus that took you to failure might require a little more recovery.
Yeah,
combined with the long flight.
Yeah, correct. I think with every instance like this, we have like another layer of awareness that's maybe built, and when we experience these things, we can pull on that past experience and say, well, this happened, so just be, don't be paralyzed by what's about to come, but just be aware that, something might be on the horizon. And then we can, I think I really think this is what separates the really, really good athletes, specifically lifters, from the beginners too, is that those seasoned veterans have this understanding like, okay, it's not a big deal if I just pull this back today because I'm not going to get injured and I can move forward. But I think beginners, younger lifters, it sounds like maybe myself does that mean I'm a beginner?
The problem is you're the coach. You don't have a coach. If this was going on with one of your athletes, you'd have probably had him drop back a bit. You'd have said, don't do that.
So in that situation,
you don't have a coach to tell you, Brandon, back off.
Yeah. So in that situation, that's completely right. So
it brings something to mind. One is Mark Verstegen, the founder of Athletes Performance, or Exos. He always says recovery is the limiting factor. And of course, we're mesmerized with movement. We're going to learn everything about fuel and nutrition and brain science and mindset, but recovery is the limiting factor.
Yeah.
And preparedness has to do with offering the body recoverable stress and waiting for that adaptation and then injecting another catalyst. So your situation is kind of like, Chris, you'll know this, it's like Brian Carroll with his new book coming out with Professor McGill called The Gift of Injury. So you just got a gift. I mean, you're recovering from what happened, but it's a gift because you're going to be 10 times the coach now, and maybe you'll even have a more sustainable approach for yourself, more awareness.
Yeah, I think that's completely right, and I think especially with certain individuals, it's very easy to fall into like this, oh, woe is me, and then there's the other side that's like, okay, this is an opportunity. What can I actually learn from this? And I'm definitely of the latter of those two in that, what can actually come out of this. Like, I'm experimenting with a lot of new things in my technique right now, and understanding just my own biological feedback and how I like transmit that in my brain to like how I feel. So no doubt there's definitely an opportunity to be had. It's not just a setback.
Chris, are you familiar at all with Tim Gabbett's work?
No, I'm not.
Tim is a guy, if we had a Nobel Prize in the musculoskeletal field for revolutionary research, I would say that Tim probably far and away would get it. Tim's probably the most in-demand sports scientist in the world today, and his work is fascinating to me because the flip side of being mesmerized with corrective exercises is being memorized with functional tests and finding this is the cause. Your right hip is got some FAI, or your motor control strategy for activating your core, your glutes is off. He's found that the programming is the bigger factor that causes predictable injuries than anything else. And by that, what he means is if we're not slow cooking our programming, if you have a spike where in 1 week your intensity is like almost double what your 1 week average was over the last 6 weeks, that's going to be a recipe for disaster quite frequently. Another way of looking at it, a little simpler but less accurate, is if 1 week you have 15% more load than the previous week. And so what they're doing now is they're measuring RPE and duration of workouts over the course of a week. And they're totaling that up, and that metric is helping identify preventable arm injuries in pitchers, preventable groin injuries in football players, hamstring injuries, back injuries, things like that across a variety of sports. And he's now consulting with basically every team you can imagine worldwide.
So, yeah, that's two things that, a couple things that we speak to quite a bit. One of those being, injury mechanisms happen either due to poor movement patterns or, again, fatigue accumulating faster than you're adapting. And we spend quite a bit of time managing both intensity and volumes with our training. But that's like what we did with Brandon that week was completely outside of his training program. So, speaks to that definitely. Great. I want to. Go ahead. I wanted to just switch gears a little bit. So I can't go through this podcast without touching on it, Craig. You sent me an article or blog post by a chiro, and it was it's on the pain science stuff, so it's at other end of the category. About we're spending too much time coaching perfection, kind of the same stuff, but so far to the extreme of saying we don't need to worry about moving whatsoever. We can lift with flex backs, and the author spoke to powerlifting specifically and had a picture example of somebody deadlifting with horrible form saying, see, look, this is how powerlifters lift and their backs aren't messed up, missing terrible loads. And I'm like, yes, I've seen that lifter and a bunch of them and every single one has a blown out back. I'm like, it was just, that article made me mad. It was so bad. I'm like, this guy is gonna if he gets to people, he's gonna hurt people.
Are we at liberty to discuss who this individual is?
I should have pulled up. I don't remember who it was, but it was a chiro here in the Northwest. Not in Oregon and Washington. I think it was Vancouver, BC.
Of course. Canadians.
Dang Canadians.
So careful.
So I was flabbergasted when I saw it that people, particularly professionals in the field, can have that viewpoint. I understand what we're saying, hey, let's have a little bit of freedom. We don't need to coach, but to say that sort of stuff, it just doesn't matter, and we're making people fearful and thinking they're fragile. No, if you're lifting heavy things or doing particular movements, you need to move somewhat well. I don't know. I'm guessing you have similar thoughts since you sent that to me. So
I think that's a very apropos question, especially given a lot of the current Facebook discussions from people like Greg Lehman and Peter O'Sullivan. Of course, we all know Professor McGill's stance. I actually think that there's a lot of merit in letting people know that they don't need to be so careful. And I think what we have to focus on is the when. If you're in acute pain and we identify you've got triggers like with forward bending, of course we want to teach you how to hip hinge. That's a no-brainer. If a little bit of bracing tunes your back so that it's less sensitive when picking up a pot or a pan or something, absolutely we want to recommend that. But I see the flip side. I see the chronic basket case who is like a robot, and they move like they're in acute pain, but they're not in acute pain. And so I don't want to create the side effect with acute pain patients of making them feel like they're going to have a legacy problem and always have to be careful. I'd rather at the subacute phase have them become aware of the need to start to load their back gradually, not be too careful, understand that form doesn't have to be perfect, and that they're not fragile, because I want them to move in a more natural manner. Now, obviously, when we get to the other end of the spectrum, opposite end from the acute pain, again, we've got to be kind of careful and have really perfect technique at the end of the spectrum where you guys live as a power lifter. But I don't think a football linebacker for the Seahawks is thinking a lot about their technique when things are happening and there's a shitstorm. In fact, if we know paralysis by analysis, if you think you stink, right? So those guys have got to be in the flow state. They've got to feel invincible. They have to actually be anti-fragile, which means not worrying at all and just being free, because they are already prepared. They've already learned what to do. If they're thinking, they're going to choke.
Yeah, when I was a college football coach, we called that read on the move. You know, you had to be reacting as you're moving.
I love that. So I think our back pain patients, they're overreading. And I think we've created that. And I think Greg Lehman and Peter O'Sullivan are doing a great service. I think that there's a time and a place for rigorous assessment of triggers and tuning a body the way that Professor McGill does. I think that that's like a catalyst. That's the initiator. But then I think we don't want to stay with that. I think that our program has to undulate, and we need to be able to move towards loading people up and getting them to be a little bit less, not less mindful, but more aware of the need to be more relaxed and to let things flow.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, those are some good points, and we certainly are of the philosophy around not thinking too much during those key points. I mean, our whole coaching platform, we don't even call it cues for movement. We work on the setup, and we expect the movement to just happen. We don't focus on, anything specific, during the course of that outside of the
I love
setup.
that.
So we call it a load tensioning sequence. But
so, Craig, it sounds like the being of flow and like anti-fragility, that's like the end game, right? That's like where we want to be with our patients, our athletes. We want people moving with extreme confidence and hopefully some level of proficiency. If that's the absolute end goal, if we can simplify the stages that come before that, what do you think those are for maybe an individual who's not moving super well? I don't think we have to go into like specific rehab side, but people who want to experience a bigger state or a more proficient state of movement.
Brandon, that's like music to my ears, because first of all, you said reasonable proficiency and extreme confidence. Those two go together. And it gets back to how Chris started this off. We are so guilty of falling into the trap of DNS, PRI, all these things where we're policing perfection. And my mentors, Professor Yanda and Dr. Carol Levitt from Prague, they both said, well, Levitt in particular said, don't try to teach perfect movement patterns. Correct the key fault that's causing the trouble. And I think that that's what Marty Gallagher is saying. To be efficient, we've got to have a programmatic view, and part of that programmatic view is not overcorrecting. So for me, there's 4 things. Number 1, there should be no pain. And by no pain, I don't really mean no pain. I mean, if we think of like red, yellow, green, red would be 6 out of 10. Yellow would be like 4 to, like 3 to 6, or yellow would be 3 to 6, and green would be 0 to 2. If they're 0 to 2, it's go time. And even yellow, 3 to 5, we may sometimes flirt with that. but we're going to audit it and we're going to monitor it. We're going to debrief about it, like with a tendinopathy of the heel or something tomorrow. So number one is no pain. Number two is we need reasonable proficiency. We don't need to police perfection, but quality must come before quantity. Competency must precede capacity. Stability must precede strength. We're not going to load dysfunction, but that doesn't mean police perfection. And I think that's led to the rehab purgatory. So that's two. Number three, and it goes with that, is load is the best corrective. So you've got to create robustness, and the only way to break somebody out of the cycle of chronic pain is to add load. The squat is the king of all exercises. We know that we want to do more hip dominant, so the deadlift. We've got to teach people to push, to pull, to carry. We've got to teach people how to get in the split stance. So for me, unless you're accessing those fundamental movement patterns with intensity, you're never going to become resilient. So that's number three, load. And number four is we got to cast our net really wide. So we should never just focus on the area of the complaint or the target goal if you're in a lifting program. We want to look at the whole body, like Professor McGill says, as a system. We're an engineer, and everything is in play. It's a kinetic chain, and oftentimes, like Gray Cook says, there may be an ankle issue driving the squat issue. There may be a hip issue driving a spine issue. There may be a T-spine issue driving a shoulder issue. We've got to take a step back. We've got to look at the whole kinetic chain so that we're not focused just on the local area. So those four things, to me, are the steps. Number one, the training, it's not no pain, no gain. There should be little or no pain. Number two, motor control first, then strength, so quality over quantity. And number three, load is the best corrective. We got to get to load sooner with people. We can't baby people. And number four, cast your net wide, look at the entire kinetic chain and find the low-lying fruit, but not just the lowest lying fruit. Find the most impactful intervention. We want to thin slice. And thin slicing doesn't just mean finding the weakest link. It means being empathetic enough to know what their capacity goal is and to know what their capacity, their current capacity is. So we can see that gap and figuring out what is going to be the intervention that's going to yield maximum efficient impact in real time so that we can gain their trust and confidence by getting results.
Craig?
That's the absolute most proficient explanation of the path to anti-fragility that we've had on this.
Yes, I am going to encourage our listeners to rewind the past 6 minutes and listen to it three times. Like that, there's simplicity, so much value, yet stated in a very simple, clean, proficient way. Craig, thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome. Thank you.
That was great. I think we should definitely put that into writing.
Yeah, that needs to go in show notes or something. Yeah, that's
absolutely.
You know, when I listen to Stu, when I listen to Professor McGill, I may be walking my dog, listening to a podcast, and I wind up getting text neck because I'm having to transcribe 2/3 of what he says. Or if it's Pavel Satsaline, it's the same thing. I need to have a notepad right there while I listen or watch a video because these guys, 80% of what they say is just gem after gem.
Yep. You know, it's funny though, those key points, I'm thinking to our presentation, the one we just gave, that's some of the key fundamental, approaches we take are almost identical to what you're listing as well. So, and I think we found that pretty consistent amongst, key players in the industry. We arrive at, we may be using a few different disciplines on how we arrived to the process, but, that broad general scope is going to be pretty similar, the look at things. So.
Well, you mentioned in the intro, and I appreciated what you said about how I synthesize things. And this is what I learned from Dr. Levin and Professor Yanda was Levin had another great quote, the method served the goals. And, we need to find out what our athlete or patient's goals are, what our client's goals are. And that's the process of empathy. And that builds relatedness, it builds trust. Dan Paff talks about that a lot, identifying the key performance indicators. The seminar that doesn't exist that I think is missing is not on all the corrective strategies or training techniques or assessments. I think it's the seminar on goal setting and on taking a history. Yeah. I think that's the lost art, is the communication, the motivational interviewing. And if we find out what their apprehensions and affinities are, then it'll be obvious to us which methods we have to mine. And so you're going to want to be a craftsman of your DNS, of your PRI, of your FMS, SFMA, etc. But that's the craft. Where's the art? Where's the intuition? It's going to come from being able to thin slice, or that blink moment, which is going to come from knowing the person in front of you.
Yeah, you have to have a goal. You know, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there.
Yep. As is often said, the goal is the goal.
The goal is the goal. The goal is the goal. Who is that? Dan John? It's a beauty. The goal is the goal.
I think it was
love
a
that.
Soccer announcer. Goal.
Thanks, Rudy.
That one took me a minute. I was like, you watch soccer? You're a football guy. I was like, oh, okay.
So, what's speaking of synthesizing, we're getting close to the close here, but tell me, who are you learning from, and what are you integrating now, that you weren't, in the last few years?
I'm unlearning. I'm unlearning. I'm erasing. I'm deleting. I'm hacking away the non-essential. I'm breaking. I've learned a lot of rules, and I know like the science fairly well, but I'm trying to become a minimalist. And I'm remembering like Yonda sort of started us down this path of functional assessment. And I think we went too far. And I think that what people don't realize is Yonda did not use voluntary exercises. Yonda found dysfunction, and then he reactivated people. He focused on restoring afference to the sole of the foot. So I'm remembering that he started from the foot, and then there wasn't a lot of cued exercise. In fact, there was no cued exercise. So I think I'm going back to the roots on that. I'm remembering what Dr. Levitt said about not teaching perfect patterns, just correct the key fault. So find that impactful intervention. For me, this issue from Tim Gabbett on load management is crucial. We're not trying to identify the assessment shortfall as much as the programming glitch. And I never thought that way before. So for me, since Professor Yonda passed away in 2002, I've just been learning more and more from the strength conditioning field, from the athletic development field. And what I found is only reinforced all the principles that I learned from Levitt and Yonda in the rehab field. And to me, that's been unbelievably exciting, that cross-pollination. And it's taught me that the principles were sturdy. That we should look at dysfunction, we should look at how one's training, we should look for minimal interventions. And one of the signatures that is becoming more and more relevant in my practice and in my teaching is to find the hardest thing that people do well. So I'm always looking for the hardest thing they do well.
Excellent. Yeah, I think that's a really good place to kind of wrap up today. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think so.
Well, Craig, we know you're at L.A. Sport and Spine. Where else can some of our listeners find you, reach out to you? Where can they access you or get resources from you?
Well, my website is just craigliebenson.com, and a lot of stuff is pretty easy to see as far as a window into what I do at my Instagram, @Liebenson. A lot of my sports science stuff that I filter. I follow some really amazing people from all over the world, and Twitter is a great place to kind of in the moment, in an instant, be able to share and learn from people that are at like a groin conference in Copenhagen or something, or a tendinopathy conference in Melbourne. And you can get updated 2 years before something is published. And my Twitter account is Craig Liebenson. Those are probably the best places. People can email me, craigliebensondc@gmail.com. Those are some opportunities for people.
Yeah, I'd have to second that. Craig's pretty active on the social media platforms. Some good information goes up there. I follow Craig. So
awesome. I think that piece on anti-fragility is probably going to make its way into our seminar coursework.
I think so.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks.
Rewrite it.
Yeah.
Thanks again for getting with us and making the time to sit down and talk with us, Craig. It's been an absolute pleasure.
I'm sorry we took so long. I know you've been asking, Chris, but you've been in my class, and I just want to close by saying how impressive it is, your appetite for growth and learning and your humility. That's inspiring to me. And to have you were always the first one in the class, the last one. You attended all three-day workshops. And I didn't really know anything about you at first, so it was sort of like a sleeping giant there. But then for me, and I don't think Rudy or Brandon will know this, but part of my course includes hip hinge, and we talk about deadlift. So naturally, I'm not teaching deadlift in front of Chris. So when we got to that section, I didn't ask you beforehand. I just said, Chris, do you mind doing like a 15-minute thing on deadlifts? And I videoed that, and that is the greatest Reader's Digest version. I should probably dig it out, and you guys should share it, because Chris, 15 minutes, spontaneous, just unbelievable.
I remember that. That was that's when we kind of connected after that. So, yeah.
Yeah, you dissected me in about 2 seconds because I was the guinea pig. So thank you guys.
Other seminars too.
Thank you so much, Craig.
Thank you.
Craig,
Thank you very much.
we'll say goodbye, but stay on for just a second on the line if you would.
All right.
All right. Thank you.